Welcome to the Wildy West, a podcast dedicated to being a voice for wild horses. My name is Chase McGoran, and I'll be your host. Let's save these horses together. All I ask you to do is listen. Alberta's free-roaming mountain horses hold a special place in the hearts of our First Nations people. They are a valued animal with historical, cultural, and spiritual ties to the Indigenous people, worthy of respect and protection as an integral part of the ecosystem, and as a keystone species who fill an existing void. According to Indigenous knowledge keepers, the First Nations people have had an ongoing relationship with the wild horse since time immemorial. They are considered sacred creatures of spiritual, cultural, historic, and ecological significance, whose presence on the landscape symbolizes resilience, freedom, tenacity, and the wild spirit in all of us. The current Government of Alberta feral horse management framework is flawed. It does not even pay lip service to the First Nations people, refusing to acknowledge the Indigenous perspective in regards to the management and protection of these spiritually and culturally significant animals. Today, I'm going to sit down and talk with Sam Peterson, a proud member of the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and descendant of the T'Chawis family, which means make way. Her personal journey of cultural reconnection led her to the Blood Tribe, who spiritually adopted her into Blackfoot families, and whose influence shaped her sacred pledges to be a voice for Indigenous communities, to protect and advocate for the vulnerable, to stand against injustice and work toward healing, to remind others to be kind, approach with understanding, and lead with empathy. She completed the Aboriginal Police Studies program at Grant MacEwan University in Edmonton. She pioneered the integration of traditional women's ribbon skirts into police attire, marking the first time this culturally significant practice was embraced by police services in North America. She helped establish the standoff shelter for the homeless, and as well as in launching the first Indigenous Crime Stoppers chapter, now known as Blood Tribe Crime Stoppers. In 2022, she received the Distinguished Service Award in the Community Services Division at the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association Awards ceremony. Sam is an accomplished, lifelong horsewoman who is a member of the South County Team Penning Association. Horses have always played a significant cultural, historical, and spiritual role in her life. She proudly wrote an eloquent, heartfelt letter to the Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations in Edmonton, Rick Wilson, outlining her concern that the historic treatment of Indigenous peoples of Canada eerily mirrors how the provincial government intends to manage wildies.
I want to acknowledge that this interview was conducted in Sylvan Lake on Treaty 6 land, traditional to the Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux territory. Horses are sacred. Horses have long been sacred to Indigenous people, transforming mobility, hunting, trade, wealth, and warfare. More than a means of transportation, they became partners in survival, resilience, and freedom, carrying warriors into battle, aiding in the hunt, and sustaining communities. As protectors and companions, they symbolize strength, endurance, and a deep connection to the land. Recognized for their spiritual significance, horses play a vital role in maintaining balance in the natural world. Across Indigenous nations, they are central to ceremonies, carrying prayers, and bridging physical and spiritual realms. Their presence endures today in dances, songs, and teachings, offering lessons of respect, patience, and unity. For many in Treaties 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories and the Métis Nation of Alberta, horses are not just animals, they are sacred beings woven into cultural and spiritual life.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's really awesome that you were able to come out today. And could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your involvement with horses?
Thank you for having me here today. So myself, my name is Sam Peterson, and I'm from Northern Alberta originally. I've been down in Southern Alberta here for, going on 13 years, I would say. But being from Northern Alberta, I was actually raised by my dad. My dad is my biological father, and he is non-Indigenous. So I wasn't really raised with my culture. So my culture's been coming back to me huge. And when I say coming back to me, I mean, I've just had a lot of experiences, whether it be researching or finding family members or just meeting other people who have spiritually adopted me into their family. And what spiritually adopted means is that as Indigenous people, we believe in all my relations. So if you connect with somebody on a level that you consider them family or a close friend, that's just my daughter, my sister, my brother. And so I've been very lucky to have a very extended family on that end of things. So finding my culture has been quite the journey. But so I was raised with my dad in Northern Alberta, which is sometimes difficult when you're a minority, I would say. But it taught me a lot about just being true to who I am. I actually didn't know I was Indigenous until I was a little bit older. My dad, I don't know how I didn't. I was a very tanned child, but as I got older, my dad finally told me when the boys at school were calling me names that I was Indigenous. And so it all made sense to me because Pocahontas was my favorite Disney movie. So I always believed everything had feelings and everything had a purpose, and I was always very kind with everything. And so I tell the story about how if I'm walking in the trees, if I broke a branch, I would apologize. If I was too rough on something that was in the environment, I would apologize. I was the little girl that lined up all her teddy bears because smallest to biggest, so everybody was fair and treated correctly. And so sometimes I look back at that and I didn't even realize that that was really just who I was as a person, and kind of leads into what we're talking about today, which is just treating everybody and everything equally. So a little bit more about myself. I was raised by my dad, and you could say that I was like raised in the saddle. So my dad was raised with horses, and so was I. Horses have been around me my entire life. And that's just, there was a period of time in my life where I went away to school and I didn't have a horse and I just felt unbalanced. I told my dad I'm going to the next horse sale, and he said, absolutely not. You can come pick up one of these ones. And that's what I did. And then ever since then, I was probably 21. I knew that horses were a big part of my life, and that it was just something that it was an acquired bill, right? Like if I was paying board, that was just part of it because it's what balanced me as a person. Now I want to talk a little bit more, I guess, about horses too within my family because it's so ingrained. So, like I said, my dad was born in the saddle basically himself, and he's known in our community as being like a horseman. He's just a horse guy. He had raised a team of horses even when I was a little girl, because I named them Homer and Bart. He had raised them, and they ended up being so well trained, both as trail horses and as wagon horses, that they went on to be Hallmark horses on all these movies on the Hallmark Channel. So they've been in over 20 movies just by pulling wagon. So a true testament of who my dad is as a horse person, and some of my best family memories involve horses. My dad had a cabin in Grand Cache, and we packed the horses up and went deep into the hills and spent nights there. So those are my best memories. When it comes to the foundational piece about horses, my dad's dad was in World War II, and he was a messenger in the United Kingdom, where he would send messages by horseback. And then where he met my grandma, who's from the United Kingdom, and her dad was actually in the veterinary corps in World War I. So when it comes to horses on that side, it's a huge part of our lives. My dad had 14 siblings, and 3 of them raced chucks in Northern Alberta. So it's just who we are. Now, on the other side of things, my stepmom, same thing. All of her family was very much into horses. And when my late uncles passed, she had 3 brothers. I inherited their harnesses, just like I inherited my stepmother's dad's harness, because I was the one that kind of kept the tradition of horses alive within the family. So it was truly quite a big honor for me. And one of them is a very beautiful harness where it's black and silver and has the bells that sound like Christmas bells. It's really great. Now, when it comes to the horses side of things, on the Indigenous side, for us, I can't speak too much about what I know, if I know them to have horses. I just know them to be people of the land. Where do I start? Is it great-great-grandpa? He was at the signing of Treaty 8. He was the chief of the community. His name was Captain. And if you look at Treaty 8, you can see X marks the spot where Captain signed. And so that's really big for me because I feel like it's roots. When I say I wasn't raised with my culture, to see your I'm a descendant of him, to see his signature on such an important document was really profound for me. So, and like I said earlier when we were talking, Treaty 8 actually includes horses. So it gives us our treaty rights to horses. His brother was called Doctor, and he was helped doctor the people. So that was really neat too. But I do know that our people were very much dog people. If you look back at the photos, we have dogs carried everything. So what else do I want to talk about? Do you want me to talk about the Indigenous history a little bit more?
If you'd like.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, like I said earlier, I wasn't raised with my Cree culture, so it's something I'm journeying back to, and I'm reminded regularly that given affirmations, I would say. Now, affirmations would be signs. We all say that send me a sign. Sometimes I feel like I really get those in a really profound way. For example, my first day at my new job that I work for a government body. I was cleaning the office and I went through some artwork and I opened it. And on one of the feathers was the name Chowis. Chowis is my family name. And we're from a really small Cree community in northern Alberta. And I gasped because I was like, of all places in southern Alberta, I would find my family's name and spelt correctly. In my office of my new job was profound. So when I talk about signs, that would be a sign, right? And so T'Chawis means to make way, to blaze the trail, to as one drop of water ripples like that. My cousin describes it to me as make way, so-and-so's coming through, get out of the way, and the crowd parts, if that makes sense. So that's the traditional family name. What else can I say about that? I think that's most of what I have. Like I said, I'm still getting back to that side of things. When it comes to my grandma, half her kids were taken by 60 scoops, so it's just kind of people don't really realize that it was not that long ago. So it's been rather interesting getting back to my roots. When it comes to me professionally, when I was a little girl, sometimes things got a little hectic in our household, and I was either the one that stood up for everybody, or I was the one that sometimes had to call police, unfortunately. But that's what led me to want to be a police officer. So I moved away from home when I was 18 years old, small town girl, and I thought I was going to get out there and change the world. Little did I realize I was a little bit too small town for downtown Edmonton, but that comes with life experience. I was hired by the Alberta Gaming Liquor Commission when I was 19 to be a liquor inspector, where I gained lots of experience about just talking to different people, having difficult conversations, and just learning about other cultures and people's beliefs. Because with being a liquor inspector, we dealt with people that had liquor licenses. So that could be somebody's restaurant, family restaurant, right up to a nightclub or a casino. I worked at a casino on Enoch for a short period of time where I actually got my first experience with culture. I met an elder. And it wasn't in the role as security. It was in the role of an inspector. They asked for my input on the First Nations charitable gaming handbook, I believe it was back then. Oh, this is going back years now. probably 15 years ago. So they asked for my input on it and how to properly approach community members. And at the time, I had a connection to Enoch, so I reached out to a friend, and he brought me to a Cree elder. And I don't know what it was, but must have been all my jibber jabbering. But the Cree elder he said, 1 second, and he went back into a room, and he came out with gifts for me. And he came out with an eagle feather, a stone, and sweetgrass, because he basically said that he could see that I was trying to do things the right way, and that I was just learning how to do that. And so that was to encourage me. The eagle feather, to me, he explained about how to make the smudge bigger. I didn't know how to smudge. I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know what sweetgrass meant to me. I didn't know any of that. I think the most important part of it to me was he gave me the stone, and he said, whenever you feel like you're not strong enough, squeeze it and feel its energy and feel how strong a rock is and how much pressure it can take. And even now to this day, I think back at that like, wow, that was really insane. Mm-hmm. And I never really at the moment asked any questions. I didn't even know what to say, but it was really beautiful. So I worked there for about 8 years, and I transferred down to Lethbridge a little bit later in my career. I was getting in my late 20s, and I thought, if I want to be a police officer, I better hurry up. I'm getting old. Father time catches up to you. So I went into policing, and I policed on Blood Tribe for almost 6 years, where I had an amazing opportunity to learn more about culture and where the black horse becomes more significant to me. Yesterday, when I went out and seen the wild horses, the first horse I seen was actually a black horse. So of all the horses you could see, it was just very insane to me. Again, one of those moments where I just gasped, because I was like, of all the color of horses I could have seen today, to see the black one was just, thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Thank you. So, did that for a bit. And like I said, I work for a different government body now where I'm in Indigenous relations. And it's been a really great life so far when it comes to my professional experience. Now, in my personal experience, when it comes to horses even more, I'm a competitive team penner. I like to go trail riding. I have 2 horses, Sarge and Wallace. And Wallace isn't called Wallace because it's silly. Wallace is called Wallace because Braveheart. So he's a resilient fella. So he's new to our herd. Sarge is also relatively new to me, but his name matches his personality. You know when he comes in the room and he demands everybody's respect. He's very well trained, so he does get it. But I'm also the secretary on the board of the South Country Team Penning Association. I have been for about 4 or 5 years now, and I've been with that club for a decade. So when it comes to horses are life for me. So more than just a spiritual connection, more than anything else, it's just the way life is. It has to be with horses. The long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's important for people to realize, especially people that don't have horses in their lives, that they need to consider other people's opinions about it. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, for sure. What motivated you to write a letter to the Minister of Indigenous Relations regarding the classification and management of Alberta's wildies?
Well, it wasn't that long ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, when I was doing research and finding my culture, that I found out that my grandma, Shirley, she had written a letter to a government body which started an investigation and a death inquiry into the death of her brother, who died in police cells in the early 90s. And so I bring this up because I always wondered where my advocacy came from. Because as much as my dad stands up for what is right, he doesn't do so in that way. So to me, I always wondered where that came from. And so when I came across that, I found it so powerful. Because in the early 90s, especially in Northern Alberta, getting something like that to happen would have taken a lot of pushing, a lot of making sure everything happened. Technology was different then too. So advocacy to me and standing up for what is right is just really who I am. And a big part of why I became a police officer. I wanted to be able to be there if somebody needed a voice and maybe they didn't have a voice themselves. Because I think as a little girl, growing up, and sometimes when things were happening, I wanted to make sure that other people felt protected and had a voice. And I honestly feel like this is one of those situations. I've been following the wild horses of Alberta for, like many people, for years and years. And I just felt like the government of Alberta just wasn't listening to the community. I felt like sometimes it was one-sided in the sense where, okay, I get it. We want the cattle to graze. They need grass. Okay, why do they need to graze there? Like, I don't understand. So it just, for me, led me down a path of researching more about what the environment was in that area, how the horses would be affecting it, what hunting was like, what are the acts that the horses fall underneath. And I know when I talked to Daryl yesterday, he was kind of asking me about my letters, and I explained to him, like, in my professional life, I'm a report writer. I need to explain why we're disciplining people or why people are being charged with different things. So you have to be able to articulate why you're doing so. So when it comes to going down the path of the legalities around wild horses, I found that they don't fall specifically into anything. And because they don't, it's being mismanaged. It's not being dealt with in a proper way. And then that just goes to who I am as a person. And I think that I go back to my story as when I was a little girl, where I think everything had feelings. And I think in this specific situation, I don't think the horses have a voice. And I think that they're being negatively impacted by the choices of the government. And I don't believe in that either. So I very much felt like somebody needed to say something. And although I can't speak to Wildies or the ones specifically in this area because I'm not from here and I don't know the oral stories from the elders, I can speak to it as a generalized topic when it comes to what horses mean to Indigenous people or people who grew up with them like myself. So, and I think being able to talk about wild horses in a couple different lights is what the government needs to hear. So that's a big reason why I wrote the letter. I just became frustrated with how it was being dealt with, and I didn't think it was right.
Absolutely. I know your letter really touched a lot of people, and it really resonated with a lot of people who read it, it really lit a fire under a lot of the people at Haas, which was really, really, really good to see. It was a really very good letter. Can you tell me about the cultural and spiritual significance of horses?
I can speak about it from my point of view. And why I say that is because although I'm spiritually adopted to the blood tribe community, their stories and the rights of their different beliefs are for them to tell. And so the gifts that they've given me in stories or teachings is for something that I can keep close, but it would definitely be for them to share. When it comes to how they've impacted Cree people, specifically my people, I've done a lot of research, as I mentioned, about horses. And it just so happens that Treaty 8, which my community falls into, horses are mentioned in the signing of Treaty 8, which makes them part of our treaty rights. So a lot of people don't understand that there's some layers here to things, especially with the wild horses themselves being on Crown land. With them being on Crown land, well, unfortunately, reserve land is also Crown land. Maybe not everybody knows this, but the reserves on which Indigenous nations occupy is not their own. It ultimately belongs to the Crown, as does the land where the horses are. So I think it's important to paint that because with it being Crown land, what are the legalities for them controlling them there? So if we're on Crown land as Indigenous people, why aren't we being consulted as to what they're doing with it? And there's also case law that talks about how Crown land and Indigenous land is utilized. Actually, that started in the early 90s in BC, and that's a whole other topic. But when it comes to specifically our culture, I think it's important to highlight that by the time the Treaty 8 was signed in 1899, that every chief was given a horse wagon. I'm just going to try to find it here. All right. So direct quotes from Treaty 8 regarding horses. Treaty 8 is signed in 1899, and it mentions horses as part of the Crown's obligations to Indigenous nations. So the specific sections that it applies, it says each chief shall receive 1 horse, harness, and wagon, 1 plow, and 1 harrow for the use of his band. So when I was looking back at Indian agent reports, I'll have to look at my screenshot, but Captain, as I mentioned, was my relative. He didn't have a very big community. I want to say there was like 8 to 12 people. I remember it being significantly smaller than some of the other chiefs. Excuse me. So I think it's really important that they considered him a chief, and regardless of how big his community was, that's what he was entitled to. So it was the key takeaway for me about just even that sentence is that they're already essential to the economic survival of the community and for transportation. So the other part that it includes, this is a quote, each Indian family of 5 or in the proportion of for larger or smaller families who are actually settled on the reserve, that's important to mention, and are engaged in cultivating the soil shall receive 2 cows until they have received all 10 cows. A bull shall be furnished to each band, and when each band has received 10 bulls, then the provisions of bulls shall cease. All the cattle thus furnished shall be and remain the property of the Indian receiving them. Now, the reason why I bring up livestock is also really important because a big part of what the government of Alberta classifies horses as is feral livestock. So if you're considering them the livestock, then they're also considered livestock here. We're talking about livestock in the treaty. So to me, it just is another way to just affirm about them as a whole. So, and that they don't fall into anything specific, and that I think that they need to invest in it. But what else does it say? Yeah, the treaty itself kind of just goes into hunting, fishing, trapping, and them having that as their way of life as well. And so I assume that having a horse is just going to help them along with that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, to me, horses are very profound in that sense when it comes to our cultural significance of it as Cree people. The other way to look at it too is that for Indigenous people, some of the stories told by elders are there's the dog days and then the horse days. So the dog days are when we as Indigenous people relied on dogs for assistance within the community. They played a role in our family systems. They had travois that would be across their back where they'd help haul things. They'd have food and things like that on them, or whether it be sled dogs. So they played an instrumental role in life that way. And then horses as a whole, we know how much that they can do. Like horses do so many things for so many people, whether it be therapy. They've been proven to be utilized successfully for therapy, or whether they be utilized in World War I to fight war. Mm-hmm. They've been used to settle Canada as a whole. So I mentioned it in my first letter that I called them a heritage species. That's not a term that exists, but it was the only way I could help capture that I think that they should be given respect to what they've done for us as Canadians as a whole, not just for Indigenous people. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I can share.
Anything you'd like.
For me personally, horses have always been a huge part of my life. So it was a couple of years ago as I was finding more and more about my spirituality, I taught myself how to bead, which was really hard to do. But once I figured it out, it was a great way to balance maybe what I had seen as a person being a frontliner. Mm-hmm. So sometimes things could be really hard to process. So beading was just something that came to me. As time went on, one of the first projects I ever beaded, the first thing I did was a black horse. And so I kind of just went with it, not realizing how important black horses would be to me, reflecting back even on my life. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've watched Black Beauty, right? Like in Black Beauty in itself, there's so much about how the horses had feelings. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the entire story is about how they had feelings and went through different families and how they missed each other and everything like that. And I think that's what people forget. So I started beading horses and eventually beaded an outfit where I got back to my culture and started dancing. And I brought my beadwork with me, but I had beaded, I'd have to count, but quite a few black horses. And that's what my regalia is black horses. Now, around the same time I was beading that, I was going through a cultural journey when it came to being a teepee holder. I won't go into the great detail of everything, but when I approached the elder about how I was told I should be a teepee holder, and I was telling him about some of the challenges that were happening and what was going on, I didn't tell him about my beadwork, but I told him about some dreams I had had. And in my dream, one of them, I had called for the black horse and I was speaking in Blackfoot. Now, being in the blood tribe community, I understood some basic Blackfoot. And so after I had the dream, which I asked for the dream, that's another part of the story, but going back to this part of it, I had been yelling something and I didn't know what I was yelling. So I had been getting different people to help me figure out what I was yelling. And it turned out I was yelling black horse. And I called for it and called for it. So I told the elder about that dream. And he took some time to think about it. And he told me that he wanted me to go home and draw a teepee design with the knowledge I've been given and the gifts that I have. Draw a teepee design with 2 black horses, a male and a female, and make them go the direction of ceremony. And then he also said that your teepee will be called the Black Horse Teepee. And I was just like, whoa. He doesn't even know. I didn't even tell him.
Okay.
I didn't even tell him about the beadwork. So to me, that's just when my connection with black horses just kind of seemed to grow even more. Unfortunately, one of my best friends, her sister, died in a very tragic way. And even the day of her funeral, we were leaving, we seen some black horses running. And I just thought, of all things, black horses are not rare, but they're not the most common color.
Yeah.
So for me to see that was just very powerful. And even my first time seeing Wildies was yesterday, and the first horse I seen was a black horse. And I just thought, okay, thank you. Thank you, whoever's watching from above, giving me the affirmation that I'm doing the right thing and going in the right direction is what I see it as. And so as times went on, I've had a couple dreams about black horses in the sense where they're protecting me or guiding me. So in one specific dream that I was having, it was a dog. The best way I can describe it was it looked like it was burnt. It had no hair. Its eyes were wide open, like it would be if you had burns to their face. Their nose wasn't there. It was just holes, and it was trying to attack me, and I was on the ground. And I was kicking at it, and it wasn't going away. And then I specifically remember a horse coming in above me, over top of me, and attacking that dog. And then I understood why the dog looked burnt, because every time the dog went to attack me, the horse was biting it. If you've ever been bitten by a horse, you know how much that hurts. So it was like it was taking its skin with it. So it was just really powerful. So then to me, at the time, I was having a lot of challenges with people immediately around me. And the elder told me that that the danger was close. And so the black horse was warning me of that, but also reminding me that I'm protected. So yeah, for me specifically, they hold a very cultural and spiritual significance to me in my journey. So even like I said, with balance within my own life, horses are a constant. Even if I'm not riding, I'll just go see my horse. Tell him he's handsome, give him some treats, feed into his ego a little bit because he's Sarge and has a big ego. But that's just something that's important to me. And I think anybody that's a horse person can say the same. Or animal person, really. If you like cats, you like cats. And cats fill your bucket, right? If you like dogs, you like dogs. So
sometimes just giving your companion a treat, it just brightens your entire day, right?
1000%.
Yeah.
And I think too, when it comes to horses culturally, like horses changed the game for all communities. Indigenous, settling Canada, like it was just huge. Whether it be transporting people across Canada or helping people be hunters, helping people be stronger warriors to protect their communities. Like horses are an integral part of North America. And so I think that's what sometimes people forget. And I think because of that, they're owed that respect. And so even though the wild horses fall outside of maybe the norm, it still needs to be invested in. We could at least do that much for them. But yeah, that's what they mean to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. I wanted to make sure that I talked not just about me as an Indigenous person, but they're really important to my dad's family. So yeah.
Yeah, they're really important to a lot of different people from all walks of life. And
Completely.
doesn't matter if you're new to Canada or not. See a horse for the first time and you go, oh my God, right?
Powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like they almost, when I talked about my horse Sarge having an ego, they almost demand respect.
Yeah.
Right? Like they just have that, okay. We get it. You got big energy. I get it.
Yeah.
And I think, they hold so much. But yeah.
Absolutely. How were these horses essential to the continuation of the traditional Indigenous way of life?
Oh, man. Where to start? I think something really, really interesting that came up to me in my research is one of the case laws I was reading was, now the thing about when they were settling the West is that they were documenting everything very detailed because they would be reporting back by letter. And so that has helped a lot because in that specific case law, they reference in the 1700s that these settlers had met Indigenous people that were on horses. Yeah. And I thought, dang, like literally, dang, that's what I wanted to read because everybody was saying that they were brought overseas and they may have been. But if you actually look up back into archaeology a little bit here in the area too, there's reports about how the descendant of horses are descendant of this specific breed of horses.
The Yukon horse?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it, but they were discovered. I don't have connection. You'll have to look into it. But they were discovered in St. Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
Their fossils were discovered from 10,000 years ago. So they were here. And if you look even at pictographs that are writing on Stone Park, there's horses there, right? So it's just, they're very much a part of who we are as Indigenous people and everybody then. So I think whether it be hunting or defending their communities, it was just part of it.
In your letter, you mentioned a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach should be taken to ensure the long-term survival and protection of Alberta's wildies. Could you elaborate on what you feel needs to be included in this approach?
Absolutely. So when I think multi-pronged, I think of different directions. I think of different branches on a tree. I think there's a lot of different ways that we should consider how we're going to be looking at them as a whole. So I think the legal recognition of them is really important. And when I say legal, I mean, when we talk about this Stray Animals Act, I might have to look it up right now, but I'm almost positive it says that they have to contact the last person that owned the horse. Well, if nobody owned the horses or the cattle before this and they don't have a brand, then how can you prove that? So if you can't prove that, then are they wild? Are they feral? Are they stray anymore? Well, it doesn't clarify that. It leaves it very broad and open. So if you can't prove ownership, then how do you return them back? So to me, I think it's really important to figure out where the wild horses on this side of the Rockies, the other side of the Rockies, or anywhere else in Canada or North America fit into our laws. It's important to note that the Sable Island horses fall within the National Park, I believe it was Act and Regulations, because I don't remember entirely what the word was that they're called, but they're protected. So that's one of them. So I'm not sure if something specific is brought in about wild horses, if it's just something, brand new act specifically for them, or if they're added to something else. I'm not sure how that looks. But I think it's something that the government needs to look into as a whole. When I talk about the different branches, another one would be, I think that Indigenous people need to be consulted a little bit more about horses and the removing of them, the capturing of them, the sterilizing of them, because it is our treaty right for us to be involved in this. They are on Crown land and they are part of our treaty rights and they were integral to our way of life. So I think it's really important. I think that they could do this by contacting different elders. I think that they can also do this by having a council. There is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. They have 2 elders on their board and knowledge keepers. That's important. Those stories matter. Those perspectives matter. And I think just being a good human at the end of the day is what is needed to help protect them. Another branch, I think, is what needs to be considered is if they're going to be in protected areas or not. Is the Crown land where they are, is that protected, or is it just remain as Crown land? Yesterday, I didn't realize how many trappers were actually in the area that the wild horses are in. I didn't know that wild horses were sometimes used as bait. And that just goes into my next point about I think that there needs to be a ban on the commercial hunting of them, which would prohibit hunting, slaughtering them, live capture, and I think that's important to understand too. Lastly, I think one of the biggest branches is we need to figure out where they are in the ecosystem there. If they're removed, what's going to happen? How does that affect everybody? And that just goes back to the reintroduction of caribou in this area, the reintroduction to the bison, and how they are in the ecosystem. Even we've heard so much in the past few years, or maybe it's just me, about the Yellowstone wolves and how some of the wolves have been tracked all the way up to like northern British Columbia by Chetwynd and Dawson Creek. And so how much that can change an ecosystem. Did she travel to find a mate, or did she travel because there wasn't any food? Well, she came from Yellowstone. Her descendant or her ancestors were introduced there. So how is that affected now? And now we see Yellowstone the way it is and how much the ecosystem has changed. So I just think we need to take a little bit more science and education-based approach into how we're going to be looking into this, how we need to help the ecosystem thrive too. I think that's really important. I know yesterday I found, I'm assuming it was a horse jawbone, and I, without even thinking, I just took one of the teeth. I just thought it was impactful to me. And afterwards, it was a little bit later, I thought, I wonder if this can be tested. The bone itself was so aged that it broke off like wood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and it was I wasn't sure if it was bleached or what, but it wasn't dirty. So that was the other thing. So it's been on the ground, on the surface ground for a long time. So as we know, different things age depending on if they're underground or on top of the ground. So I was intrigued to know maybe how old that is. I didn't realize till later that maybe that could be a significant help. Maybe it's not horse bone, I don't know. But either way, I hope it'll help. So I think that there's so many different things that need to be looked at when it comes to the government trying to better understand how horses impact our community as a whole, us as Canadians, Indigenous people, how they affect the ecosystem in the area. Are they a significant part of it? We know that from the different organizations that track some of the wild horses that there's a lot of them that are born and they don't live into adulthood. Well, to me, that means that other animals are eating them. And to me, that means that they're part of the ecosystem. So I think, and I made a point of referencing in my letter that the assimilation of these horses very much mirrors how Indigenous people are treated. And we've seen what happened to how we were treated. And that's why I think it's really important that they take a step back and be appropriate about how they proceed. So, yeah.
Okay. Right down to getting close to the end here. So I ask this to everyone who comes on the show. Why should people care about these horses?
Why? I think I keep highlighting it throughout the whole thing, but I don't think we would be Canada without horses. I don't think we would be where we are without them. Logging was done by horses. Farming was done by horses. Hunting was done by horses. If there was no railroad, how would people get to where they are? Horses, or they walked, right? So to me, I think as Canadians, we owe horses that. Make sure that they're taken care of.
Yeah.
The same way that they advocate for them not to be slaughtered and taken to different countries for meat, the same way I think we should be looking at them now. They're part of our heritage. They're part of what makes Canada, Canada. So I think that's why people should help. and should advocate because it's the right thing to do. And I also think that how the government is handling it is unethical. I'll give you an example. In my research, I found that the government went into an MOU with WOS, that is a horse society, and this was 15 years ago or so, but nobody can find that MOU. And so I don't think that's being transparent. I don't think that's being forthright. I don't think that properly documenting that is, I think properly documenting that is the most appropriate thing to do, but on the other side of things, can that minister do that? And why would they do that to only that society? What is the legality to that? Well, if horses specifically are kind of in a gray area of the Stray Animals Act, do they have the legal right to be able to do that? I don't think so.
And to those at home who might not know, what is an MOU?
Memorandum of Understanding. So.
Perfect. Yeah. I guess that kind of leads us into our next question. What can people do to help?
I think just continuing to advocate for it. I think getting educated on horses in general. I realize that our society has changed a lot. Not everybody has had the experience of being with a horse. But it's not, if you take horses out of the equation, it's about just being a good human. They're vulnerable. They're not protected by anything. And they're not being treated fairly. So if we look at even animal abuse cases, is this considered animal abuse if they're being culled and killed or given contraceptive? So, I mean, that could be something that could be looked at. And I think that maybe not everybody knows that this is what's happening. I think that raising more awareness would be good. Reaching out to the different societies and educating yourself about what they're doing and the work they've done and why they're doing it. And maybe, like, there's so many of us that follow Haas. And we all have our favorite horses, I'm sure. I said to Daryl yesterday, if I see White Spirit, my whole day is going to be made. And you know what? I didn't see White Spirit, and I was okay with that because it's the time of year where there's not a lot to eat. So I was able to see about 60 horses because they were all trying to eat the same thing, right? Because there's quite a bit of snow in the hills. So there's that. And I don't think people realize how much where they are is logged. And that area is man-made. So we've created that ecosystem for the horses to be in. I think if we take a step back, I don't think anybody realizes that. So that's really interesting. I also read some case law about, there was a chief in BC in the early 90s who wanted to have more land for his community for their treaty rights, for hunting, fishing, things like that. And it talked about how the different companies in the area had logged that crown land and how it was affecting their community. And I think that's really important for people to realize too, because it's like they weren't consulted about that. So I don't know. I think if they're creating this ecosystem for the horses to thrive, then why are you interjecting the way that you are? Just my 2 bits about that, but
yeah, those are valid questions.
Yeah, if I go down that rabbit hole again, it could be shaky, but
and our final question, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you'd like to say?
Indigenous rights. Specific to the areas for which the current horses are located, Treaty 6 indicates that each chief shall receive, in recognition of closing the treaty, a suitable flag, medal, and also, as soon as convenient, 1 horse, harness, and wagon. Specific to my treaty, Treaty 8, the chief, for the use of his band, 2 horses, or a yoke of oxen. In case law, R versus William in 2012, the trial judge declared that the Tiscotan people, Aboriginal rights were to capture and use horses. Furthermore, the judge said that wild horses had migrated into the claim area prior to 1793 and that the Tiscotan people were using horses for transportation and work before contact. The judge also found that the use of horse for work and transportation was integral to the culture and that it constituted an Aboriginal right. Additionally, even if the horses arrived after contact, their capture and use was for the extension of the community's traditions. The Sparrow Test, from R versus Sparrow in 1990, a case brief done by Thomas Milne, details a 2-part test. Does the legislation affect the Aboriginal right? Is the Aboriginal right unreasonable? Does it cause undue hardship? Does it deny existing Aboriginal rights? Lastly, is there a valid legal objective, and does the objective uphold honor of Crown? Meaning, the decisions on wild horses in all of Canada should be in consultation with Indigenous groups, as it is a part of our Aboriginal right. Aboriginal is used in the context as in the Constitution Act of 1982. In 1982, Indigenous peoples were legally called Indian under the Indian Act and Aboriginal under the Constitution Act. I've done extensive research and have went through tons of historical records about the wild horses in Canada. Some of them include, in 1754, English fur trader Anthony Henday observed entire Indigenous tribes in Saskatchewan using Spanish horses for buffalo hunting. In 1807, explorer David Thompson documented multiple herds of wild horses along the upper reaches of the Columbia River in British Columbia. In 1923, historian Grew, in his book The Untamed Horses of the Wild, noted that farmers and settlers often released horses to graze in the fall, with local communities recognizing individual ownership. In 1917, the University of Calgary's online archive features photographs taken by Frederick Scott of wild horses in the Yahatinda and along the Reindeer River. In one of the photos, Scott was capturing horses to send to France for artillery use during World War I. In 1919, the same archive on the University of Calgary's online archive includes images of wild horse roundups in Hussar, Alberta. Scientific research that I found that was pivotal was in 1977, Richard Slater, a researcher at the University of Alberta, conducted an extensive ecological study on feral horses in Western Alberta. His thesis examined their population dynamics, behavior, habitat use, and ecological impact. His findings suggest that wild horses in Western Alberta are a naturalized species rather than invasive. I found an amazing thesis that had scientific research supporting wild horse protection. In 1977, Richard Slater, a researcher at the University of Alberta, conducted an extensive ecological study on feral horses in Western Alberta. His thesis examined their population dynamics, behavior, habitat use, and ecological impact. His findings suggest that wild horses in Western Alberta are a naturalized species rather than invasive. They have a long-standing presence in the region. They coexist with native wildlife without significantly disrupting ecosystems, and his research supports stronger protections and sustainable management practices to ensure the wild horse's survival. The loss of the wild horses of the Great Plains. For those unfamiliar, the last remaining wild horses of the Great Plains were removed from Alberta's Canadian Forces Base in Suffield in 1994. Biologist and author Dawn Dickinson details this in her book, Caught in the Spin, The Wild Horses of CFB Suffield, providing a critical account of their disappearance. It is important to note that the Sable Island horses have existed for over 50 years and are recognized as a naturalized species. They are protected under the Canadian National Parks Act and the National Parks of Canada Wildlife Regulation. Additionally, conservation measures ensure that they remain undisturbed, emphasizing their ecological significance. In the book entry, Ozaid, which is a book about Stony Place names, it was told by an elder, Gordon LaBelle and Flora Ear, in 1987 that the story of the Lake of the Forks, or the Upper Kananaskis Lake, speaks of a time when people were gifted with supernatural powers. It is said that a vision of horses appeared in the lake, which inspired some young warriors to go obtain some of these horses. On the other side of the peninsula, on a small island with some trees, the horses came charging towards them. Leading the herd was a gray horse. As it galloped closer, a strange flash of light went through its eyes. As it whinnied and opened its jaw, flames burst forth.
I think people as a whole just need to get back to doing what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Take your emotion out of it, and let's think about what's happening. Whether it be to horses, people, we need to do what's best for our country, our neighbors, our families, our friends, and that's what I'm advocating here for the wild horses, is we just need to do what's right for them.
Mm-hmm.
And do things from a good place. Because I believe that if you do things from a good place, that's the good energy that you put into it. I believe that energy is something that is past. So if we put good energy into how the horses are supported, I think we as a community and as a country and as a province will thrive. And I think that's the best way to look at life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we get too caught up in what isn't the good energy.
Yeah.
So I think that that's what I would encourage people to do, is to educate yourselves, see how you can help the societies that are in the area, and get to know the horses. They're photographed regularly. They all have their own stories. They all have their own bands. And it's just really something beautiful to see. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, going back to a point you said earlier, after everything the horses have done to build Canada, the least Canada can do is at least let them try to survive.
Well, and just recognize them as horses. They're not just livestock.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to me, a big part of livestock is whether they're helping. I mean, livestock has changed. So sheep, pigs, cows, those are more for human consumption on more than anything. Well, we don't consume horses here. That's not what our society does. So are they still considered livestock, or where do they fit? And I think that's something that the government needs to do, is to figure out where they do fit and how they contribute to our society. But like anything, I think their survival is our responsibility as Canadians. I think that all animals are. And that's, I think that whether animals are endangered, threatened, or if they're invasive, I think that's all part of our responsibility in our country. And so that's something that they already practice. They already have stats behind that. They already have procedures about that. So all I'm asking for is for them to be looked at as a species that's already there within our community, right? Like, yeah. But we can only, like I said, put good energy into it and see where that goes and bring some awareness about it. And I think that I would really love to see more people with a science background speak up about maybe how they're being treated, how they affect the ecosystem, good or bad, right? Like, yes, I love horses. I'm a little biased, but I also think that an ecosystem needs to thrive too. And so what does that look like?
More information is always better when it comes from a place of learning and science.
That's right. And so we try to keep everything evidence-based, but if there's no evidence about how the horses are affecting the ecosystem, then how can they make the decisions that they are? Mm-hmm. Their framework is loosely based on, I don't know, what they think is right. Yeah. Not science and evidence.
Absolutely. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to show us your...
Yeah.
Did you want to show us the...
What I brought?
Yeah. So we can get that on camera.
Yeah, we're still going.
Yep.
So horses to me have always been a big part of my life, as I explained. And so I was asking my husband, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to show that. How do you show that? Should I just haul my horse or bring him there? Or what do I do?
We'll just have him right in the background.
Yeah, do I bring photos of horses when I was growing up? I don't know. But so I looked in my china cabinet, because I was like, well, everything that's important to me, I put in my china cabinet like most people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, there's got to be something around here. And I have a book that was my late grandmother's. And I was like, there you go. Black Beauty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, well, that black horse again. And if I open it up, those are my doodles. So to me, whoops, see, it's in rough shape. She's original.
It's a well-loved book.
It is a well-loved book. But it's just, I look at it and I think of my grandma, who's just such a kind person. One of the kindest people you'll ever meet. But I also look at it, and I talked about the movie Black Beauty, where it specifically talks about how this book is written from a horse's perspective. And I think that's what we are forgetting when we're talking about the wild horses. So I think that was really important and a big point that I wanted to get across. So looking in my china cabinet, looking for something through all of my, I don't know, this and that I keep. I just thought it was really perfect. So brought that. As I said earlier, the practices that I know and that I've been giving the right to with the Blackfoot community. It's not for me to speak about them, but I can speak about my teepee story, which I talked a little bit about. But I brought the black horsehair that we hang from, we call them our teepee ears. So they would be the flaps at the top of the teepee that help with controlling the fire and the smoke within the teepee. So these are what we hang from ours.
Okay.
So this is true to what our design is. So black horsehair. I just thought it would be important for me to bring. Yeah. And then lastly, I talked about my black horses I beaded. I didn't even count how many I've beaded, but this is the first one I ever beaded. And so it originally just started with what you see in the circle. And then as I went on, my design included this, floral vine work. And so this is the first one I made.
I love this sound.
I'm a jingle dancer, so I'm not the greatest at it. I have a little bit of help. I'm self-taught for the most part, just by Googling it, watching other dancers dance, and trying to get back to that, because the jingle dress dance is about healing. So I just felt like this was, like you said, I love the sound, and I just felt like it was for me. These are my hair ties.
Oh, that's pretty.
So they would be on my braids, and then this was my horse that I used to have. She's not a black horse, but she had a lot of fire like I do. But her name is Penny, and so my grandson said that I should bead Penny. So I went for it. And she looked like that. Fiery little bay with the heart of gold. And no, she didn't give up. She tried hard every day. I've been using this either for my hair or, and it helps keep my plume up, or I've used it as a belt buckle. And then the last ones, these are my earrings.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to me, but I mean, everybody has their own connection to certain things, and I don't know what's going on with that black horse, but it just keeps showing up in my life. I don't even have a black horse, actually. So, and I've never owned a black horse, but it just seemed, black is my favorite color, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yes.
It's really neat to see.
A lot of time. A lot of healing. But yeah.
Alrighty, we can just push the mic out of the way.
Hope I didn't babble too long, and hopefully you can organize my thoughts a little bit.
Yeah, that was a wonderful interview. Thank you.
Why should we continue to advocate for wild horses? Wild horses are an essential part of our natural and cultural heritage, deeply connected to the Indigenous traditions, Canadian history, and the ecosystems they inhabit. They have thrived for generations as a naturalized species, contributing to the biodiversity and maintaining ecological balance. Despite their historical and spiritual significance, wild horses face threats from misclassification as stray livestock, habitat loss, and culling. Protecting them ensures the preservation of Indigenous cultural connections, ecological integrity, and the legacy of free-roaming horses in Canada. Sustainable management and legal recognition are crucial in safeguarding their future.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. My interview with Sam Peterson. The amount of support we have received from you has really meant a lot, and it brings us closer to seeing these animals saved. A huge thank you to everyone that took time out of their busy schedules to sit down with me for an interview. If you want to help, there are a ton of different things you can do. If you live in Canada, you can write to your local member of parliament or directly to the Minister of Parks in Alberta. If you aren't as comfortable doing that, you may wish to follow the Help Alberta Wildies Society, or HAWS, on Facebook to get more involved and see what other things you can do. Of course, there's also the Alberta Mountain Horse Preservation Society on Facebook that you may also want to go check out to see what they are doing to help. The information for both of these groups can be found in the show notes for this episode. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you go and give them a follow. And of course, every like and comment means a lot. And clicking subscribe on YouTube will do even more for us. Every little bit truly does help and allows me to show tangible proof that people care. If you would be so kind as to share this with friends or family that you think might be interested in this topic, or who you think would want to help, I would really appreciate it. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter or X and Blue Sky using the tag @TheWildieWest. For any business inquiries, please contact us at thewildiewest@gmail.com. Join me next week as I finally tell the story of Tumblr that we delayed to make sure we did the story justice. I'm your host, Chase McGoran. Thank you once again for listening to The Wildie West.